So back again with Dr. Fernie from Peak Performance at Spectrum Rehab. Psyched to have you back, and I love to hear everything we went over last week. We watched the video a couple times just to kind of like, I'm fascinated by some of the stuff that you were saying last week, and we're going to add on to that this week. And we're going to go into a little bit about return to play.
Sure.
A lot of people have heard it, or maybe they don't. If you've been injured before, you've definitely heard it, and you're going to be fascinated by Ryan's explanation of this. So without further ado, Ryan, just kind of explain to everyone what return to play is and what that means, from injury to orthopedic visits to physical therapy to back to the field.
Sure. I think the most common one you see in return to play is like ACL injuries or lower extremity, like post-ops. So return to play really has two main guidelines. One is the tissue healed? So if it was an ACL, for example, we know you can't return to play before 9 months because statistically you're just at a higher chance of re-tear. That's just from the That's just from the idea of like the graft becoming bone, that you could be strong as heck, you could have full range of motion, pass all the functional tests, but we know that graft isn't ready till at least 9 months. And we have a lot of data on that, so that is a marker.
Do athletes differentiate from normal
people?
No,
that's we have 9 months. We think is we know from I think it's every month before 9 months increases by 20%. So if you're at 8 months, you have a 20% higher chance. I think it's 7 months, it's 50%, and then each month down, it's just a higher percent of re-tear. From 9 months to 1 year, which was always the gold standard, used to be a year ACLs, we know that it's basically a 10% chance of re-tear rate, whether you come back at 9 or 12 months, right? So we know even functional test and strength, forget Adrian Peterson, he was the outlier. He came back in 8 months, I think, and had the best season of his career. That was a complete outlier, right? So we know 9 months is pretty much the gold standard, right? But then, we know we have that timeline from graft healing, but now we also have criteria we have to make sure we hit from our standpoint, right? We need baseline range of motion full. We need baseline strength close to full, quad to hamstring ratio. We want as close to a 1-to-1 ratio as possible. We want at least a 90% quad ratio, quad strength to the opposite leg. I want more. I want 100%. 90% to me doesn't make me feel great. I want them to be equal at that point. And then we get into our functional testing, which is triple hop tests, single hop tests, wide balance tests. So things that look at how functionally strong you are, and how how well you can control your knee movement, right? Talking about things you do with the tracer to make sure that you don't have an excessive valgus moment when you're doing a land or a hop, and you can control the hop. There's a box jump test, again, looking at knee valgus. Knee valgus is kind of a big marker from a movement standpoint. A lot of the return to play tests then get into functional movement screens, some subjective questionnaire like fear avoidance, to let them know all right, so we know the range of motion's good, we know the strength's good, they're objectively passing these hop testing, we know they have good control, we do an agility test, but now what about their subjective, right? Are they fearful? I've had one of my best clients ever get docked. She didn't fail the test, but she never knelt. She was never kneeled. She never kneeled since surgery. And I've never felt so stupid. I'm we never put her on her knees to see if she could get into a bird dog position, because we never, sport wise, we don't think about it. But she had this fear of her knee touching the ground. And I was oh my God, right? Yeah. Just something, then we started exposing her to being on the ground, and we're wow, lesson learned. Even though it's not, she's a gymnast that does flips, she's got these still from phobias that happen because of the surgery.
I think it's fascinating you said that, because I think that's why there needs to be a physical therapist in the field that just deals with athletes, because it's not a big deal for you if you're maybe a mailman or something like that. But if you're an athlete, there's things like that you have to be able to do, and and the fear could actually re-injure you. Mm-hmm. So the psychological aspect of that is huge. Mm-hmm. So knowing that you're confident going back in. I would be a career-ending leg injury too.
Sure.
And the hardest thing I had to do was think about re-injuring myself. I was good. I knew I was back, and all I could do was think about getting hurt, and that's what hindered me more than anything. So that's fascinating you said that. And then with your 9 months of recovery on the on the ACL, so how many visits per week do you like to see a patient? Or in total, what do you usually see a patient for?
I try to take them up to like the 6 month mark if I can. Insurance is always an issue and all that stuff, but if I can get them to 6 months, I like them to pass the return to play test at 6 months, because then basically at 6 months, if you pass your return to play test, now the next 3 are like, it's like controlled games. So now we're getting you on the field, you're cutting, you're pivoting, you're avoiding contact, you're in a controlled environment, but you're starting to have that like graded exposure to get yourself more confident, to show like, look, by 9 months, like now when somebody hits you, you're gonna be all right. You know what I mean?
There's another aspect to deceleration where when you're dealing with an injury like that, where you tend to pound your knee down instead of absorb shock. And I've seen people, you can clamp down real hard, but they're having a hard time absorbing. So that's kind of where you would send people over to us and stuff 100%. Where we can go through those and overspeed people and then have them decelerate into a pull.
Yep.
So they're having to overcompensate for the pull that they're on, and it helps them absorb shock. Because they can lock it, but that could re-injure it.
That's a great compensation. They lock because they don't trust, right? And again, getting them in your hands where you can teach them this, have them succeed in it, get feedback, and then drill it. That's like everything when it comes to return to play.
And one of the things that we, even as a wide receiver in the NFL, they would teach us how to pull to a stop, and it had everything to do with just lowering your center mass and decompressing.
Sure.
And it's hard. I've seen the kids, every ACL kid I've ever seen, they'll either feather one side a little bit unless they've come from like you. And when I get them from you, they're very balanced. There's almost zero asymmetry by the time I get them. My job's pretty easy. I just put them into a class where they're pretty much normal.
Right.
But I've seen them come from other places. God bless them. I'm sure they do great work with them. But they're so used to working with somebody who's not into the psychology of it. They're not surrounded by other athletes at the same time, and I love that you have that for them, because it is like, for the rest of your people's lives, they're going to talk about their sport experience, whether it was good, whether it was bad. It's so important. People come up to me still to this day. Remember this? Man, I would have been great if it wasn't for my knee injury. If I could have just come back, or just would have been more confident going back. I hear this all the time. And being that I'm like an undersized guy that made it through like the life of like a Frogger, of getting into a professional sport and everything, which it takes a lot of luck too. And people always tell me, I could have done it. If you did it,
sure.
I could have done it too. So I'm like, huh? All right. Okay. But I do think that too. It takes a lot of luck, and I think you have to avoid injuries and some of the preventative stuff that people don't even think about that. They're like, I'm just going to go get in and perform as best I can. Well, what about preventing?
Yeah, if you're hurt, you're not performing, right? Yeah. And usually your best movement, if you're performing at your like the most elite optimal way, is your best injury prevention. So they go, performance and injury prevention go hand in hand.
We have a saying for that.
Yeah.
It goes, your best ability is availability.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So if you're this is something that, if you're in the training room, it doesn't matter how good you are, you're not worth anything to a team. So like mainly as a professional, the higher you get and you want to find edges, you start to find them in preventative and longevity and stuff like that. So there's a whole, Ryan's got all kind of programs for that, arm care and elbow and shoulder. And the stuff is fascinating what he's come up with. And because he's dialed in so much on the athlete, everything that he studies and everything that you're doing is dealing with the athlete, not just somebody who, unfortunately, I'd say 80, maybe you tell me, what is it, 80% of most people's clients are Medicare?
80 to 90 at most. And I'm opposite. I think I'm 95% or 90 under the age of 65 active adult. So your continuing
education would all have to do with what's going to help this guy with a hip replacement or a knee replacement or whatever. Yeah. Whereas you're dealing with an athlete who's moving at super high speeds. Yeah. You get to focus on something. Your studies go a different way.
Yeah, 100%.
Like so
the other thing too, like going on, is like every session you have to be able to do somewhat of an assessment. So we're always kind of keeping an eye on mobility, strength. If we see a joint effusion, like every session you're doing a quick screen so we know what we're going to do next, right? So we're not just like going blindly, I don't know, and just staying on top of, like, if you're starting to see, again, the shoulder internal rotation start to lose a little bit, we can catch things before they can become a problem.
And we talked about that in our notes before the show, was talking about how we turn subjective into objective. And you have a machine. You want to talk about that? And we have a machine too that does that too. It's called a tracer. It's one of our sponsor. And the tracer will make every of your movement vectored and turn into something that has an objective angle written into it. And so that's something where you just have to have an eye for it previously. Sure. But now with the technology upgrades, we can make that objective, and so can your Proteus, right?
The Proteus, yeah. But back to the tracer. So return to play testing has its limits, and I think the tracer, and gets me excited, where we're looking at, like, again, I'm still testing if they're scoring their triple hop test with my eyes. But if we can hook them up to a tracer, we can have true objective data even better than what we're doing now. And that's why the return to play testing, it's still evolving, it's progressing, it needs to continue to evolve because we're not perfect at it. But something like the tracer, like, that's kind of game changing from that standpoint.
Yeah, and we won't talk about how, well, we will. So one of the things that we're going to start to implement is preventative stuff, or you have to check previously where you were. You have to, like a concussion protocol. Will we do that with the knee injury or with a test on the tracer? And if you come back, that should be done by basically every team should have one.
100%.
So then you go, okay, now when I go to physical therapy, I want to be back to this movement, right? Yep. So that means I'm 100%. And think about that psychology.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I'm 100%. Right there, it showed me that I was 100%. I'm better. You know what I mean?
That's awesome.
Or if not even better than I was before, like you said. And typically, like when I went to the NFL Combine, and I knew what my 40-yard dash, I knew what my vertical leap was and everything. And I go, all right, I got hurt. Bad injury. If I get back to those numbers or close to them, I'm good. Like I could play this sport again. That was like, I'll have to relearn some of the stuff, like the playbook and everything, but I got my physical qualities back.
Sure. If
I never had those numbers at the Combine, I wouldn't know what to aim at.
You're just guessing.
So that's why we're going to use the tracer. We're going to try to use the tracer with all the teams that we go to and just start getting everybody tested, just like concussion protocol.
No, I love that.
You don't know what you are cognitively, objectively, unless you took the test previously. So when you're 100% back, you can pass that test. Same thing with the tracer. So, and the Proteus, talk about the Proteus.
So, I guess somewhat similar concept. It just measures how well and how fast you can rotate. So we can get a baseline assessment on how well you can rotate, like mimic your baseball throw or rotate as fast as you can, and then we can check and program accordingly whether we need to get you faster or stronger, simplistically speaking, then retest in 6 weeks to see if we're making progress. And then hopefully be able to relate that to pitch and velo or exit velocity to see, like, if is our data correlating with improved performance in the field, which is what that's all about too. Right. So
name some of the athletes that have used the Proteus to make it famous.
Patrick Mahomes right now is all over. Like, he took it to the next level. Eric Cressey, who's like the guru of baseball training, probably got on board like 3 or 4 years ago. And so he's got a bunch, and it's starting to pick up because the importance of objective data is like getting more and well established and like able to be like coming to like hometowns too, not just for sports.
Yeah, I thought baseball really, some of the technology that we have, I think baseball was a little bit ahead of us on, because I'm literally watching some of the machines that they have for baseball. There's a lot of money in baseball.
Yeah, for sure.
So I'm watching some of the machines that they put their kids on. And Eric Cressey, I think he's in Massachusetts.
Yep.
Watching some of Mike Boyle's in Massachusetts. Some of the bigger, strength conditioning guys are out there. I think they've all started to evolve off of each other, just like kind of we are down here. And I feel like we're kind of taking this, the two of us are kind of moving this forward. So it's neat that you're on with us, and really soon we're going to have Tim Watson on, who's going to do the psychological stuff.
That's awesome.
The team, he does all that stuff with his Mainland's team. You can see what they did this year.
Oh my gosh.
And on ESPN Radio on the show I'm on, the locker room, Chuck Smith really shouted out how much that has helped setting goals and having a mindset for doing a certain amount of work, which it should be a prerequisite to come in and train with you too.
100%.
I mean, like Tim speaks. He's a very powerful speaker, powerful dude.
Oh my God.
You hear him talk, his words have weight. It has weight, not like mine. But he talks, and he's like Anthony Robbins, but like even bigger, But that's a neat process that they're gonna have to go through, and I mean that is the difference between being an athlete and going to peak performance and being at wherever and just going to a place to do hip replacement stuff.
Sure.
And you can see that the machinery that you have in your place, much different than what I've seen in any other physical therapy offices. Because I refer basically everyone to you. I know a lot of physical therapists too. Their kids come here, and sadly, they'll even say the same thing. Like, I would send my own kid over there because he has better equipment. He's better apt. There's more aptitude for improvement with his place. So
I think the mindset too is like physical therapy is on a continuum of strength and conditioning, and injuries and PT's just at this end. But we want to get you to optimal performance. So my office looks like a gym, as I feel like it should, and it keeps that mindset of a gym, and it keeps the mindset of we're getting back on the field. We're not just laying on tables and getting hot packs and getting passive stuff. Like, we're going to compete, and we have to give the athletes the options to compete and the equipment necessary to compete.
And you get a chance. You work really closely with Chase Petty, who's a first-round draft pick from Mainland, who looks like he's probably going to jump on a roster this year.
Good chance.
Good chance he will. Talk a little bit about what you do with him, because he's never been hurt. So I'm like, he goes to you for what?
I take no credit. Chase Petty is, first off, he's the best kid in the world. He's a hard worker. I got to know him in high school, and like I always say, like all I said was like, if you want help, I'm here, right? Like, I'm not going to chase you type of a thing, but I'll write your arm care programs. We'll soft tissue work. I'll make sure your hips are good, and boom. Bucc, can I come in today? Bucc, can I come in today? Which I thought from a 17-year-old kid, the mentality that he had, that like he wanted to make sure that he was staying healthy, staying the strongest, staying fit, not make sure he's looking at every option, right? He's putting it all in. So I thought that the maturity he had was amazing. And from an athletic standpoint, he's unbelievable. I mean, he's a freak. That's where I say I just help him, keep him on track, but he's a different level human, the way he can move, how strong as he is, how mobile he is, how he competes. He kind of checks all the boxes of a first-round pick,
right. Now with your move, you're actually expanding your practice into Baseball Performance Center on English Creek Avenue. When is that taking place, and how's that cool? How cool is that?
So it's super excited. We're hoping to be in before actually January 1st now. It's going to be an 11,000 square foot facility, 6,500 or so of the 4 cages, 4 mounds for them to do the skill work, hitting, actually do some infield now and pitching, a 2,000-ish square foot gym, performance style gym, like squat racks, open space, Proteus, and then around a 2,000 or so PT office. And the PT office is going to be open for everybody. It's not just your elite athletes, but it's going to allow us to work closely with those guys, the baseball players, and also be a nice sender over to the gym to do more strength and conditioning based stuff. Because that's another thing I get asked a lot is there, like, my 12-year-old wants to start lifting weights. Can you train him? I'm like, well, I'm a physical therapist, but yes, he needs to start lifting and getting stronger, but there's not really a place around here that does like pure strength and conditioning, right? Would you say?
Well, because there's the competition is with your teams all the time. So as soon as you get to high school, the only people that I would really work with would be like the 12 to maybe 14 range before they get to high school. And then you would be trying to talk over a coach in high school who has a designated strength conditioning program. So then you're like, what am I paying for when I have these people over here? And if they go to somebody else, they're going to get in trouble. Yeah. So I just don't compete with that, and I don't want to.
Right.
But at the same time, it's really important.
And I think the baseball world doesn't get much gym time at the high schools. Let's put it that way. So there is a need for versus like the football team and whatnot. So there's definitely a need for the high school baseball age to get like under the bar a little more and learn like how to lift specifically for baseball versus just football lifting for a baseball team. I see that happen a lot, and that's not probably ideal.
We talk a lot about baseball, but how about your softball players? What do you typically see for softball players?
So a lot of, assessment's very similar. They got to rotate well. They need good hips, good hip mobility. If they're a pitcher, there's some. Again, the throw's different, so you're not worried as much about overhead function, but there's still bicep flexor pronator issues. So the lower half assessment's exactly the same. The upper body's still the same, and looking at the rib cage, making sure the thorax can rotate equally on both sides. And again, less shoulder issues because of less demand. However, a lot of female athletes tend to be more hypermobile, so they lead to like some other issues. But again, a lot of similarities. Rotational athletes are rotational athletes, and we're trying to get them to transfer their energy as efficient as possible, whether it's baseball, softball, golf.
Yeah.
You know.
And you've said, speaking of girls, you've sent us over one of our athletes named Sophia Curtis, who is just a phenomenal athlete.
Wow.
She's going to Virginia Tech, and we've gotten a chance to work with her now. And she has been, just phenomenal.
Yeah.
We've gotten her from somewhere in the 25-inch vertical leap range to just over 30.1 on her vertical leap. Her 4-jump vertical leap, which is even the most impressive because it's a repeat movement, she's up at like 28 inches. Jeez. Which means her repeats are almost as high as her vertical leap. We've only coached one other kid that can repeat their single counter movement vertical leap 4 times within 90%. His name is Trey McClear. And I think you work with all the McClears as well. We work with each other's athletes all the time. This is something we do constantly, is send people back and forth. So us being in the same building would be really helpful. It's just hard to chase you around. You're everywhere. You've been at golf buildings. You've been in there with that type of people. You're in there with the baseball guys, and we send a ton of football. You've seen Austin Johnson, Vinny Papali of ours. And they all love you. I know that having you close by, it's like you got a corner guy that you just have such a comfort knowing that you're around. So
and vice versa. Thank you.
Yeah, we love having you on here and love your segment. We'll keep getting better and better at giving you guys information and content, and so that you guys have something to grasp. And then we'll give you some tips or tricks on stuff to do at home, so you don't have to come in and see you on the opposite end where you don't want to be.
Sure.
You want to be on the front side. You want to be above the curve of being injured. So, without further ado, thanks for having us. We'll see you next time.